following preview was begrudgingly approved for all audiences.
You're listening to Elevator Music.
Welcome back to Forward Thinking, presented by the Professional Collegiate League. I'm Ricky Vellante, and I'll be joined by my co-host, David West. As usual, we'll be discussing challenging the status quo, doing social good, and bringing about positive change to the world, while also talking a little bit of sports. In this episode, we're joined by PCL Chief Marketing Officer Wendell Haskins, who will be discussing his time at the PGA of America and the recent open letter that he sent with his recommendations for how they need to change moving forward. We also dive into Coach K's recent Black Lives Matter video and whether or not there was any sincerity in it. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Forward Thinking on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube. You can get more information at thepcleague.com/forwardthinking. And welcome back to Forward Thinking. I'm Ricky Vellante, joined by my co-host David West. We are joined also by the PCL Chief Marketing Officer Wendell Haskins, formerly of the PGA of America, as well as Def Jam Records in the NBA. And he's going to be telling us a little bit today about a recent open letter that he sent in response to the PGA's call for shifts on social injustice and how they should address their rules within the organization. So thanks for joining us, Wendell.
Thanks for having me, Ricky and David. Good to see you guys, even though I see you guys quite often these days.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about it, what happened. I know the PGA kind of put out a call for proposals and recommendations, and then from there, what you said and what prompted you to really come forward in the way you did.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I worked for PGA for almost 4 years, and I was brought there to do some new things and bring new energy to the organization and kind of new thought leadership. And after the George Floyd incident, several leagues and big businesses and corporations were putting out statements and Black Lives Matter statements and saying where they stood on the issue. The PGA of America and the USGA were a little late on making their statements, but when they did, they released a statement from the CEO, Seth Wah, and the president, Susie Whaley. And, in reading them, there were just a bunch of, empty platitudes, kind of, in my opinion, more, thoughts and prayers type things. Susie kind of said, the game is built on kindness and faith and hope and want to continue, down the path of those things. And Seth kind of echoed that sentiment. And one of the things that really struck me was when there's a larger story behind it, because I brought a lot of new relationships to the PGA of America. And David, some of those, quite honestly, and you guys, were basketball guys. Steph Curry was one of those guys. I did a commercial with Chris Paul and Dr. J, and all those guys are people that I play golf with regularly. So one of the things that I tried to do in golf was to bring some of that excitement and the energy and some of that star power to golf, because those guys really love the game. But when the PGA finally did issue that statement, the image that came along with that statement was a picture of Seth Wah, the CEO, and Susie Whaley with Steph Curry, right? So when I saw the picture, it only brought back bad memories for me, because I initiated the relationship with Steph Curry and was actually prevented from nurturing it and cultivating it. And my direct report kind of called me off of the meeting, made me cancel it with Steph, and then scheduled a meeting for himself. As a Black executive and somebody who had been pursuing that relationship for several months, it was just really disappointing for me and something that I wasn't able to bring to completion. So, and quite honestly, at the time when I was initiating the relationship with Steph Curry, nobody in the building even really realized that he played golf or loved golf to that extent. Mm-hmm. But being a marketing person and knowing the culture, I was like, Steph would be a great ambassador for Junior League golf. And at that time, the ambassadors for the Junior League golf program were only other professional golfers. So they weren't looking outside of golf to influence kids to play golf. And as you know, in professional golf, the only Black golfers are Tiger Woods and then Harold Varner at the time. So knowing that Steph was an avid golfer, pursued him, tried to initiate the conversation. When I went to the NBA Finals and was introduced to Steph, and we were going to talk about it post-finals, that was 2017 when the Warriors played the Cavs. Right? So
4 years in a row, man.
Right. You guys are both very familiar with that, right? So, but it was 2017. I met Steph briefly. He said, let's talk after the season is over. I love the idea, and let's talk about it. And several months down the line, his people kind of gave me a call. gave me some time and asked me to come out to Oakland. And unfortunately, it never happened. So as a result of all of those things, to see that the PGA also in Golf Digest used the picture that actually prevented a black executive from bringing a black person into the golf space, it was just, I said, look, they wrote a letter and they were, asking for input from other people to say, what can we do to make the golf space better and give us your comments. So they wrote an open letter. So I just decided to write an open letter back with some comments of my own about what the culture is like at the PGA of America, what I experienced, which I'd never shared with anybody publicly, at least. Certainly my confidants and people that I know knew very well, because when you're going through some of those experiences, the only people that you can really talk to are the people around you, especially when I'm an employee working for the PGA of America and defending the PGA of America the time that I'm working there. So it's not like I would be at the PGA of America and maligning the organization that I work for. I'm always, hey, things are getting better. We're working on this. And so I just took the initiative to write the letter for people to understand what it was like for, a black executive and the only black executive within the PGA of America to experience those things.
Right. What was it? What's the general sense like in the golf world? I mean, from my perspective, and I think from a lot of people's perspective, golf is considered an elitist sport. It's a predominantly white sport, white male sport. So what is the general sense of like the environment? We've always sort of watched Tiger Woods as like the anomaly in the sport, but I've always wanted to know like what is the general feel of a game like golf that is even more so than a baseball or even some of the structural impediments that exist in basketball. It's not as in your face, I would say, as golf is. So what is that world like?
Do you mean as an amateur or at professional level? Or
I just mean period. Just because I'm not a golfer, but like I didn't know anybody who golfed growing up, and then Tiger Woods was like the first black person that I knew publicly that played golf. And I couldn't name another black golfer outside of Tiger Woods. But I just generally just want to kind of take a peek into the golf world and what that world is like in terms of what it appears to be from the outside.
So David, I'm very similar to you. My upbringing was very similar. You grew up in Teaneck, I grew up in Patterson. Right. Golf was not in my household. I did not pick up golf until adulthood in my late 20s. But when I did and started to have all of these influences around me of people that did play golf, I had no interest in the game. Someone tried to introduce it to me once, and I was like, "This is ridiculous. It's stupid," and so forth. Then I had a mentor of mine who was 10 years my senior, a guy named Michael Van, who ran the Shark Bar. You may be familiar with the Shark Bar. It was a hot spot in the 90s. He was a good friend of mine, and he loved the game, introduced me to the game. I started going to Chelsea Piers and hitting balls and just starting to understand the game, and then started to watch more golf on television. It was during the Tiger Woods era, so I was definitely heavily influenced by Tiger.
Right.
And then, I worked with the NBA at the time as well. So when I would be working with some of the legends and the greatest players, they would all be talking about golf. They weren't really talking about basketball. Dr. J and George Gervin and Sam Jones and all those guys. I worked on the 50 greatest players presentation many years ago, and I was on the court and all these guys are talking about golf. And that's when I kind of started getting into it myself. And I was like, all these guys are playing golf. Like, I felt like you. Like, what's the allure? Like, why do these guys love golf so much? But then when I got out and started playing myself and played well enough to at least enjoy it, I started to understand it, So one, the rules of the game, like even understanding what's going on is critical. Before that, I would watch golf. I had no idea what the guys were even doing or how difficult even some of the things that they were executing even were. A short shot in golf going from here to there can be more difficult than hitting a ball 260 yards like a drive. But, there's technique and execution and everything that goes into the game. And when you start to pick up the game and start to learn it, those are the things that you spend time on. And then the camaraderie, man. I grew up playing basketball, baseball, football, up through high school. And those were my sports, was never really introduced to golf. Right. So, my upbringing was like I said, similar to yours. But when I did get introduced to the game, I kind of went crazy with it, and I started reading all about the history and reading all about the history of all of their great championships, like the Masters and the PGA Championship and the US Open. Right. But one of the things that I did, which a lot of people probably hadn't at that time, was I was really curious about the Black history in the game, because I was reading all these books, and I'm reading about, Walter Hagen and Bobby Jones and Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer and all these folks, right? And I'm like, where were the Black people during this time? So I found this book called Forbidden Fairways, and quite honestly, it changed the trajectory of my life, because I found out so much about Black history in golf that I didn't know, that there were people as early as the late 1800s that were out there playing golf and contributing to the game. A Black man actually invented the golf tee. A Harvard Dental School graduate named George F. Grant invented the first golf tee, patented it, and he owns the original patent for the tee. I named my tournament that I created the Original Tee Golf Classic, because it goes back to dates back to the invention of the golf tee by a Black man. So, when I started my tournament years ago, the NBA has actually been a sponsor of my tournament for all of its 20 years. And I've honored people like Dr. J and Sam Jones and George Gervin, guys who are avid golfers. I've, honored people who have contributed to the game of golf, like Lee Elder and Renee Powell and Charlie Sifford. But I just really became fascinated with the history of African Americans in golf. And what I wanted to do was to create something that would contribute to that legacy, to make sure that people knew the history of African Americans in golf, and created that. But, so a combination for me, of knowing that history, really being able to promote that history, and then getting involved with the culture of the game. So, when you're out there playing golf with your boys, all of the same trash talking and all that stuff goes on, just like on the basketball court. And I play with some of those guys too that you're really familiar with, who are really good golfers. Ray Allen, Lonzo, Eddie Jones. I'm down here in South Florida, so there's a whole golf community. That Lawrence Taylor is a big golfer. I mean, the Black community of golfers is actually very, very robust, of people that you would love spending time with, because you have a lot in common. So when you really get engaged and engrossed in the golf community that exists, it's a lot of fun, man. And everybody's game is different. Some guys, we're all amateurs in the sport, right? But some guys are better than others. In the case of Steph Curry, he's a scratch golfer, meaning he shoots in the low 70s and can break 70 from time to time. So he's better than most. But when a lot of people also don't know about Steph is that he grew up playing basketball and golf. I think he was on his high school golf team, because Dell is a golfer. So this is something that he grew up with, and he was probably ahead of most, because he was playing golf from a very young age and loves the game. And now he plays at a very high level. And he's even played in some amateur events on the Corn. It used to be called the Web.com, but the Corn Ferry. It's called Corn Ferry now. But he loves the game. He plays at a really, really high level. And once you get over once you get over the period of learning the basics and the fundamentals and enough to be able to enjoy it, it takes on a whole nother life of its own. But you got to get over that learning curve, because it can be really, really frustrating. You look stupid at first, you feel stupid, but once you learn the fundamentals and learn to execute some of the basics, you can really, really enjoy it, man. And then especially when you travel so much, everywhere that you go and you travel, there are golf courses, right? So we all know Michael Jordan loves to play the game. And for Mike, it's been like a respite for him, because no matter how many places can Michael Jordan actually be out in the open, in public, and enjoy himself without being mobbed? So there's definitely, some tranquility there, some peacefulness. He can still go out and play with his boys. I've seen MJ out playing several times with like Oakley and Fred Whitfield and his whole cadre of friends that get out and gamble, talk a lot of shit, and play some good golf, So, and MJ just bought a course and built a course of his own right here in Hobe Sound called Grove 23 that is supposed to be spectacular, from what I hear. I haven't been there yet, but he's totally consumed by the game. He's an avid golfer for sure. He's really engrossed in the game. It's just being introduced to it, and then playing with people that you enjoy being with can really be a game changer for most people. But, when I got introduced to it and fell in love, I turned all of my friends on, to the game of golf. And now my boys from Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Jersey, and all over the place. That's all they want to do is play golf.
In that sense, why should people care about diversity in golf? Is it, you think it's coming because Black people are playing it more? Like someone like yourself picked it up in adulthood, and you're saying this is a legitimate space that we should be in. You went in there as an executive.
We should have representation everywhere. I mean, golf is just another one of the things that Black people do and participate in, but we don't have any strong representation at the professional level. I mean, right. Tiger has done an incredible thing for the world of golf. I mean, he's arguably the greatest golfer of all time. But just like you said, who are the other? Name the top 10 Black golfers in the world, right? I mean,
Tiger Woods, Tiger.
right. Tiger Woods. I mean, you have a couple other guys who are on tour right now, Cameron Champ, who's phenomenal, and Harold Varner, right? And then Tony Finau, who's Polynesian. I like to claim Tony Finau. I picked him up in the draft on the Black side, but I think he played a little ball too, and he has a brother. But Jabari Parker and Tony Finau's mothers are sisters.
What would you tell a young kid about why he should pick up an interest in golf?
I'm going to tell you, man, for me, I mean, golf really changed the trajectory of my life. Not that I was going in any kind of negative direction, but when I picked up golf, I just had a passion to tell other people about it because it impacted my life in such a way. And, the people that I met, I was just found myself in the company of people that I never thought I'd be in the company of because of golf. One of them was Dr. J. When I grew up, Dr. J he was my Michael Jordan. He was everything. And I honored Dr. J at my tournament one year because I knew he was an avid golfer. It was the year after I honored Charlie Sifford. And me and Doc have been super friends and almost like family to this day. And that's just one of the examples of some of the people that I've met through golf. And then all the way up to the White House. I mean, when I did the Sifford event and spearheaded Charlie Sifford receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom, I was with Barack Obama. You know what I mean? So here I am in the White House as a result of all of the things that I've done. And there have been many people along the way, man. There just been, it has enriched my life in so many ways, and not just from the golf aspect of it. In business, some of the things that I've been able to do as from the relationships that I've made in business. I'm friends with some of the, biggest people in all of high finance right now as a result of golf. And I would have never foreseen that either. I mean, real genuine relationships with people like Ken Chenault and Bill Lewis and Bayo and Glassley, who are like, some of the most brilliant minds in high finance, but they also play golf. And, it's always nice to get a call from Ken Chenault, come play Indian Creek in Miami at least once a year. And then I've been able to inspire and influence other people too. And then at the PGA of America, some of the things that I was able to do and the people that I was able to inspire and encourage to get into the game and provide opportunities for has been great. I ran the HBCU golf tournament there called the Minority Collegiate Championship, which my alma mater participated in, which was Hampton. And just seeing all of those young Black college students, picking up the game and loving golf was just, for me, something that was personally and professionally inspiring, that just motivated me to want to do more and introduce those people to some of the great relationships that they can have in this lifetime through and enhance those relationships just because they play golf. Right. You'd be surprised at some of the people that you can, meet and develop relationships with, and end up having a 4-hour conversation with because of golf. I can attest, Ricky and I just had a conversation with Steve Mills just yesterday, and Steve is a golfer. I mean, I know Steve because we have a common friend, but we really bonded through golf, And I played golf with Steve a couple times. He's now kind of back and forth between Boca and New York, so he's local. So I'll see more of him. But more than likely, when I see him, it'll probably be playing golf together, So, and that's something that just is a great thing to have in your arsenal, in your repertoire. If you can play golf and you can keep your ball moving and know and understand the game and really enjoy it on top of everything else, man, it just opens up a whole new level of relationships and experiences that you can have. And that's what I would tell young people, to pick up the game. Try to learn it, learn the fundamentals to the point where you actually enjoy it, and then you'll see the results of it really throughout your life. And it's also a game that you can play pretty much for as long as you're healthy for through the rest of your life. Now, and you will want to play more and more golf as you get older.
Circling back to your open letter and tying together the element of representation, you worked within diversity and inclusion at the PGA of America. Take us through a little bit the recommendations and sort of the situation as you see it, and how the PGA of America and golf as a sport in general can become more publicly representative of the African American community.
Well, some of the recommendations that I gave are specifically to the PGA of America. You actually have to know and understand what the PGA of America is and isn't, right? Most people get the PGA of America confused with the PGA Tour. They're two separate entities that split in the mid 60s, right? So the PGA Tour is dedicated to the professional golfers like Tiger, Ricky, Rory, and those guys. And then the PGA of America is dedicated to what we call the golf professionals, right? Which there are 29,000 of those people in the United States. So the golf professionals are people who manage country clubs, manage driving range, give golf lessons, things of that nature. And they've gone through a process of training to be the most knowledgeable and experienced people in the workforce of golf. So I worked for the PGA of America. Okay, so the PGA of America also runs two major championships. They run the Ryder Cup, which happens every 2 years. They alter every 4 domestically and in Europe, and then they run the PGA Championship, which is one of the majors, along with the Masters, the British Open, and the U.S. Open, right? But the PGA of America is also has a governance structure. So they have a CEO and they have a president. The president is elected by the 29,000 members, essentially, right? So most people have no idea how that works and how it functions. Out of the 29,000 PGA professionals, there are only about 160 that are Black.
And to really hit this point home for those that don't golf, if you're that kid who's going to the course, the golf pro is probably the person you're going to interact with.
Exactly, right? That's probably the person who's more likely going to give you lessons, welcome you into a public facility or a driving range and want to give you lessons. I can tell you, when I started playing golf at Chelsea Pier, there was only one Black teaching professional there, and that's the one that I had the relationship with. And, I worked in the music business kind of at the time. I would give him CDs and new things, and he would kind of in exchange, we almost ended up bartering lessons for music. We still have a great friendship to this day. And he kind of spoke my language, knew my culture. I was really comfortable with him. And it really made it enjoyable for me this guy's name is Will Larkin. And he went on to manage Van Cortlandt Park Golf Course and still in the golf game. But for me, I went to Chelsea Piers and immediately saw someone that I could identify with, and he was welcoming and we just hit it off. And he was able to teach me the fundamentals well enough to be able to enjoy it and kind of set off a fire within me to do everything that I ended up doing in the golf space, which was totally self-motivated, self-driven, self-motivated, entrepreneurial. I started a golf tournament of my own. I'm like, who does that? Created a little fashion line of my own, the original T-shirts with Dr. Grant's pictures on them, the Harvard Dental School graduate. Next thing you know, Will Smith and Sam Jackson and all those guys, have these T-shirts because they didn't know a Black man invented the golf tee, and that really resonated with them as well. And then my tournament was sponsored by the NBA, and I worked in the music business, so people like Luke, who's also a golfer. He lives in Miami. Luke had already been playing golf like 10 years. So here I am getting introduced to the game. And now I'm starting to find my community, right? I'm starting to find all of these people that play golf that I had no idea even existed, because particularly when it comes to the black people that play golf, it's almost like the underground, right? It's like underground hip hop music. Like you got to know where to go and get it, know where to hear it. Right. You might have to be able to make a mixtape at night by listening to Mr. Magic from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the morning. So in the golf space, there are pockets of black people that are playing golf all over the country. You don't see black people even involved in golf on professional television unless it's Tiger Woods. Right. So as you get introduced to the space and are meeting other people, like I can go to Maryland and hook up with those people, but like a whole bunch of black guys that play golf in Maryland or Richmond or in Virginia somewhere, you know, or DC, Chicago. And you find out that there's this real underground, robust community of black golfers that is a camaraderie that exists, that these are all of the brothers out here that play golf. Don't even talk about the sports world, the Jerry Rices and the, you know, Lawrence Taylors and all those guys that play golf, and all the baseball players that play golf. I think the basketball players probably play the most. From what I see, and you probably know, David, you know, Iguodala's a big golfer. Chris Paul and his family love to play golf. When I came to the game to meet Steph that day, obviously Steph and Dell and those guys played. Klay Thompson, I think, plays a lot of golf. I mean, you could go down the list. Kyle Lowry. I mean, I have a whole list of guys that I know are, you know, professional athletes and sports guys that play. But once you get introduced to the game, you find that community that exists, and it kind of takes off from there.
So if I'm doing my math right, by the way, that's less than 0.5% of those golf professionals are black.
Right.
Yeah. Because look, man, I always say, you know, golf history parallels American history. So everything that happened in American history has happened in golf, but golf is behind in their history. So whereas golf had, well, I should say where America you had slavery, you had segregation, you had Jim Crow era, right? Then you had a civil rights era. You had the Martins and the Malcolms who went and protested, and you had civil unrest and wanted to talk to the government to make sure that people were employed and demanding their rights. That has kind of never happened in golf. Even in other sports like basketball, baseball, you had a Jackie Robinson who was
a movement, right? Yeah,
you had a movement. Like Branch Rickey picked up Jackie Robinson and said, Jackie, we're going to protect you. You know, we're going to go. It's going to be difficult, but we got your back. When you play golf professionally, you're an independent contractor. And professional golf has never been that kind to the black man. You know what I mean? So, you know, you had Charlie Sifford. He's an independent contractor out there. He's on his own. He doesn't have a manager or an agent or a team. It's not a team sport. You're not on the road with a team of people saying, if he doesn't play, we don't play. No, you're out there, and cats are just going on about their individual business, and whatever his problem is his problem. So golf never addressed that and said, look, we're going to make sure that people have access to golf and can play golf professionally and have the same rights and opportunities. So they were really, really behind, and you never had anyone. I think a lot of people were hoping that Tiger Woods was that guy, right? That Tiger would be like, hey, I'm coming, I'm getting a black agent, black manager, but that's not the case, because generally when you have someone of his stature who's the best in the world, he's able to make certain demands, right? And he could have insisted that there be more black people in the workforce or resources dedicated to black people who want to get in the game, but that didn't happen. So golf has never never been challenged in that way. They've never been challenged to, for the workforce and for the governing bodies to be more diverse. It just hasn't happened. Right. So there's definitely stereotypes. There's definitely a lot of alienation in golf. Black people couldn't even get jobs as reps. You know why? Because no country clubs want black reps coming to sell golf equipment to them, because they're not going to buy it from black reps. So therefore, you can't get hired in the workforce because it was so monolithic, and they wanted to keep it that way. Wow. And it's just evolved to be a culture that is pretty much devoid of black people. And to this day, and why would you, to see that there are only 160 out of 29,000? So think about this. Why would you encourage your son or your daughter to go into golf? Why would you encourage that? Right. Knowing that there's going to be so much difficulty, there's going to be a ceiling that you reach, that you're never going to be a head pro or a golf professional or run a country club, because they're not going to allow it to happen, because the culture that exists in golf is so there's so much. They're still in the segregation era. Right. When we talk about black, they're still in the segregation era. So they have to overcome the segregation era, and those things generally don't happen unless there's some kind of unrest, right? There's just generally some kind of unrest. So even in this moment, what inspired me with the whole George Floyd thing I mean, I hadn't worked for the PGA of America in 3 years. So it wasn't like I was sitting there waiting to like persecute the PGA of America. I just said, in this moment, and what I see happening, and they're misrepresenting what they've done and accomplished, and even what they believed in, and using my work, which they really weren't even supportive of in the beginning, and then was kind of taken from me. I said, this might
Right.
be this might be the opportunity where I really need to speak up and say something to hold the industry accountable. And in this George Floyd moment, you see everybody's coming out with with statements and
Right.
demands and things, right? And the golf industry will probably have to use this moment. I mean, this is turning out to be a real moment in time in the golf industry. Like, that letter is the letter that's been heard all around the golf industry right now. And it's causing conversations that have never been had. It's causing people to do things that they have not done before. It's causing a lot of self reflection and introspection from a lot of these governing organizations to say, we need to do better. Like in this moment, we can't keep sending out these empty platitudes in this moment. We have to be held accountable. And
Right.
if that letter has accelerated that and exacerbated that kind of change, then I'm glad that I did it.
So now jumping into a couple of other things, more so on the basketball side, speaking of statements that maybe didn't have a whole lot of meaning behind them. I'm in particular very interested, actually both of your thoughts on the recent Coach K video that came out the end of last week around, obviously all of us here 100% agree, Black Lives Matter, that should be out front. Everybody should be accepting of that, just a statement of fact. But everything that came after that, I'm curious as to your thoughts on how sincere that video came across to you all and where it landed in what all Coach K shared around the Black Lives Matter messaging.
I've kind of looked at what he said. I looked at sort of the reaction of all of the corporations and stuff, and it's all been the same in my opinion. I think they're just opportunistically using this moment to appear to be on the right side of history. Coach K has had years and years and years to correct some things and be a voice, to make real structural change in the environment that he's been so successful in. And I just think that, and even the statement, it didn't feel genuine. And again, the way that we have to deal, and I think this is a little bit with what you were talking about, Wendell. It's like when you know that there are structural impediments in the way, the structural impediments that keep golfing diversity basically at zero, the structural impediments that keep the NCAA and that college sports system as is, and as is, it is defined as simply it's an exploitative system. I think, again, we're beyond the point where you can just make simple statements. Your actions, literally the way in which you operate daily in your life is what is going to resonate more and is what people are going to ultimately judge you by now. I think because we're at a point in our nation's history where, because this generation of young people is so tied in and they're able to get information and consume information on their own, I think you have the ability to sell people on something that may not be totally true, right? You may be able to say, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter, but then go off and live a life and contribute to a system that continues to exploit young Black people. So I looked at it like I did with most of these statements, as opportunistic and people just using the moment to not look bad. One of the things I've been saying to folks is like, the worst thing you can do right now is literally have no opinion. Like that whole just sitting down, being quiet, regardless of whether or not you believe what's going on. I think people understand that you can't be quiet. So you got to say something. So even some of the messaging, and I'm seeing like removing of the Aunt Jemima image. Gosh, there's just been not so much the Confederate statues, but some of this other imaging. Like I saw something the other day that they're going to stop using the word master bedroom in selling real estate and something. That's ridiculous. I mean, these types of surface things are not what's going to help move this nation forward. And regardless, particularly people who have those higher mantles, those who have greater platforms, should seek to really, look internally, look at themselves, see what they can do to, adjust to this changing of the world, changing of our system so that we can produce better outcomes. And again, we haven't been able to solve, the exploitation issue in the collegiate level. We haven't been able to crack diversity issues in the professional ownership level in all of the major sports. Employment, the whacked out, it's a whacked out, just it doesn't feel right. The Rooney Rule in the NFL is almost like a patronizing thing. So none of that stuff, I think, is really resonating with people. That's why people are so agitated, and you see people continuously voicing their displeasure, right? It's like people thinking about now, like, we're going to hire Colin Kaepernick. Everybody's like, you're 4 years too late, man. Like you're just reacting to looking like you're going to look like a complete jackass to your grandkids. When your grandkids, I was thinking about this the other day. There's so many people right now that are like putting their foot down to go down in history as being fucking racist. Like, you're literally saying, you know what? I don't care. I'm going to be this way. Your grandkids aren't even going to be able to mention you. They're not going to be able to talk about you because their granddad was the guy on TV talking crazy about Colin Kaepernick for 3 or 4 or 5 years. So I just think people have to really come to this realization that we are moving forward and the nation is changing, and the solutions that people want, the outcomes that people want, they want real impactful solutions. And, diversity is to say it is one thing. To care about, say Black Lives Matter is one thing, but then to really do things and work in a way that makes your words believable is a totally different proposition. And I don't know if folks, again, these people are in their 70s, and all of a sudden you're 70-something years old and you realize in the last 2 weeks that Black Lives Matter. Give me a break.
Right.
Give me a break.
Right. To piggyback on what you said, David, it's about action right now, and that action is about the distribution of wealth, right? In the golf industry, they love to promote that the golf industry is this $87 billion industry, right? But what's the distribution of wealth? All right, so there's $87 billion with this in this industry, but who's getting all that money? You couldn't even name. You're talking about naming Tiger Woods and the professional golfers on tour. Name me who the Black executives that you know. I mean, in basketball and football and baseball, you can name a couple Black managers and people who work in front office and that. In golf, if I asked you to name who the executives were in golf, you'd I draw a blank. You probably draw a donut, right? I worked in golf, and I can name the 3 that I know.
Right.
And right now, like with Coach K's statement, is like, man, Coach K's made a whole lot of money off of basketball, brother. You know what I'm saying? And there've been some other brothers who've made good livings for themselves and made some more money, but Coach K got a continuous farm system coming in through his thing, and there's no real distribution of wealth at all. He can wish them well once they decide to go to professional basketball, but under that current system, they're not seeing anything. They work within the confines of the NCAA, and that works out really well for him. So right now, it's about the distribution of wealth, and even when you look at the history of the Black experience and the Black struggle, right? You even look at Martin Luther King. When Martin Luther King started having problems, when he said all these other immigrants came to the United States, they got land grants, they got land that they were given, taught how to farm, they were given loans and things to be able to support themselves and their families. They were giving, right, so they could have houses and homes and build equity. Black man was never given that. They were just set free. They didn't want them to have any education. They didn't give them any land. And they prevented them from being even considered citizens and full human beings. We've had to fight for just human rights and then civil rights. And Dr. King even said, this is probably when he probably started having the most problems. He said, when I come to Washington, D.C. this time, I'm coming to get my check, right? He's coming to get his check. So everybody else is getting the check and getting the opportunity to provide and build equity. And traditionally, we've been these workers, and the United States was built off of the backs of free labor. I mean, damn, who wouldn't love to have some free labor, bro? Like, how much you could do with an entire free workforce and build your company and build the legacy of your family to have
generational wealth.
Generational wealth.
Right.
I mean, So it's about this point forward, the workforce, jobs, equity. What's going to be the distribution of wealth moving forward?
Right.
So for Coach K to get up there and say what he said and know the construct that the NCAA has created for predominantly the black athlete, he's going to have to say a little bit more about how the distribution of wealth should happen moving forward. Because I know he's probably set for life.
Right. We had Wendell Pierce on, and he said that social justice of the 21st century is economic justice.
That's right.
And that's going to be the telltale sign of how America moves forward, from this moment. It's ultimately, we know that community crime and some of the despair that exists in communities around this country are specifically tied to the economic disenfranchisement of those communities. So we know, I mean, people are aware now. Again, that's why I say, like, this moment is so strong, because you don't have to wait for the Sunday newspaper on Sunday, right, to come out with the next news cycle. This thing is like every single minute, every single moment, it's changing, and you don't get a chance to, you don't get a chance to escape now. You don't get a chance to say, well, by next Sunday they won't print another article. Those days are over with, right?
That's right.
That's the reality of it. I always want to know, I always have this question, and I'll ask this to both of you guys, but like in the sense of sport, right? Even though professional basketball players, retired professional basketball players, like you say, Wendell, aren't necessarily a part of the golf world, is there a responsibility from these guys who play so much golf, who go and patronize these golf courses and play in these celebrity golf tournaments? And I think even last year or something, Steph did something with golf on NBC or something like that. Where they
Holy moly.
He has a show.
Yeah.
Holy moly. It's hilarious.
Holy moly.
But stuff like that. Like, is there a window for these guys to use the platform and use their love of the game of golf right now to push for some of the structural changes in their sport?
Look, man, absolutely. I don't know if you know this, but last year, I mean, Steph committed, I think it was either $1 million or $500,000 to Howard University and their golf team. Howard didn't have a golf team. And a young man wrote a letter to Steph Curry. Steph responded, got involved with Howard, and basically funded their golf team to spearhead a golf team at Howard University.
Wow.
And got Under Armour involved. So Under Armour is going to provide them with their equipment and stuff of that nature. So there's definitely a window for people to get involved, to support golf, that know golf and know the culture, because what I find, like, one of my biggest challenges is working within the existing construct of professional golf, is like, I'm dealing with people on a regular basis who don't know my culture.
Right.
So when I'm saying everything that I know to be true and factual and trying to bring people in, I have to go and get this approved by someone or get an opinion from someone. There are no other people, even of my peers around me, to corroborate what I'm saying. Right. So I'm going to someone who has no context of my culture and what's relevant in Black culture to be able to promote Black people getting involved with golf. Right. So tell me, like, how does that work? Either you got to give me the green light to go ahead and do what I got to do and support me, but don't prevent me. And in the case with what happened with Steph Curry here, I'm going to, this older white guy and saying I have this meeting with Steph Curry, who says, I want to have the relationship with Steph Curry. Right. You know what I mean? So I'm like, and here I am on the sideline, like, damn, like, who do I? It's like when you get beat up by the police, who you gonna go tell? The police?
Right.
So when you're in golf and you're the Black guy and you're getting abused and they're knocking you out and preventing you from doing stuff, and like I said, your experience is kind of abuse, you can't go to anybody else, even in the golf industry, to say, yo, they beating the shit up and they're beating me up in here. Like, somebody help me. So, but to answer your question, David, absolutely, man. Larry Fitzgerald is also on the board of trustees. He's a big golfer. He does all these pro-ams. He's a member at a couple of really exclusive clubs. And those guys are have a real interest in being involved in golf and promoting golf because they feel the same way that I do. Like they love the game and they want to see other people, and particularly young people, pick up the game at an earlier age. And one of the things that probably with any sport, particularly with golf, because most of us black folks that are adults now didn't pick golf up at a younger age. We wish we would have been playing earlier. Like a Steph Curry. I mean, that's why Steph Curry is a very highly accomplished golfer. Like he can play at a very high level because he was playing since he was a kid, along with basketball, right? And he has the skills and the technique to be able to play at a high level. So those guys understand what golf has done for their life, and they want to impart that on others. And certainly, we can't rely on other people to be able to deliver that kind of messaging because it's unique to you and it's part of the Black experience, right? So you can share that with other young people to inspire them and to get involved with the game. So I always look to people of that nature to get involved in the game to drive the messaging, right? Because you can't get that on the PGA Tour. I mean, Tiger does what he does, and that's cool. And then Harold has a couple of initiatives of his own, and then Cameron also has initiatives of his own out west, which are phenomenal, quite honestly. But you can't just rely on 3 guys to drive the entire Black culture of golf, right? So you got to look outside of those guys and look to people that are just big influencers that love the game, that are willing to create the messaging. And what I find is that, especially working at the PGA, when you call those guys, they're eager because they're like, nobody's calling me about golf, but they love golf. You know what I mean? Like I never got a call about golf, but hell yeah, I want to do something with the PGA. So being able to use that to your advantage and then bring guys into the game to be able to have that kind of influence on a very high level is very much needed in golf, and that's something that I advocated for while I was there.
I would add, as an ally or whatever you want to call it, I do want to not to skirt past the responsibility that's on those executives that Wendell mentioned as well within the sport. I mean, obviously, for some of these athletes, and David, you and I have talked about this, golf is their escape. So to heap additional responsibility on them in what should be their opportunity to get away and be themselves is unfair. So I do want to make sure that there also has to be institutional buy-in, that the appropriate measures are in place from a board representation standpoint, from an executive standpoint, from the golf pros. I mean, less the 0.47% or whatever it was, that's tragic. So clearly there's institutional failure there to include a huge and influential group of people in this country. So I think that's also needs to be included.
And Ricky, to get back to your one of your initial questions and the things that I recommended, definitely from a leadership perspective, particularly at the PGA of America. I mean, having people of color on your board is critical. That's really where all of the decisions are made. There's some other programs that I recommended that would give other Black collegiate level young men and women the opportunity to become PGA professionals that would actually contribute to the membership. There are a number of things that I suggested in the open letter. Supporting HBCU golf is another one. That's where the majority of the collegiate Black golfers are playing at HBCUs. If you want to see that grow and you want to see the interest in the workforce grow, start doing things with those HBCU programs and get them, job opportunities and get them engaged in golf. So there are a number of things that I suggest and recommend, but all of those things start at the decision-making level, which at the PGA of America is the board. And some of the things that I suggest and the criticisms that I had aren't just, they were directed at the PGA of America because I work there, but those are industry issues. The entire industry needs to do a lot better. These are things that permeate throughout the entire golf industry.
Now, do you think, I often look, and I mean, I just feel like golf is one of the last strongholds. A lot like the NFL, I feel like the golfing world is like it's like Custer's last stand, right? It's like
it's the last bastion of white supremacy.
Right, it's like the last. So I mean, so when we talk about what that structural change looks like. I mean, what does it look like in practical terms? Because again, that was part of the reason why I asked that first question. Like, what does the golf culture look like inside the country club? And I think you've done a good job of like explaining what your experience was as an executive, and just reading through, some certain parts of your letter. What stood out to me most was the incident around Charlie Sifford.
Charlie Sifford, yeah.
And
yeah.
the whole honoring him,
Yeah.
the whole idea about honoring him. When I read that, I'm like, okay, this is similar to a bunch of other things, like those impediments that I talk about, right? Like, it seems like every time you try to you're making steps toward progress, and something that really, if you think about it, like honoring a Black legend historically, I think, right, would be the best way to frame it. And then for them to have sort of this built-in resistance to it, what I thought was very emblematic of like that last stand. Like, look, bro, you're going the wrong way. We're not going there yet. Here's how we're gonna do it. And then the last piece was that I think you said like nobody from the organization came to DC in terms of honoring.
Yeah, leadership. There was leadership. Yeah, leadership.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like that that would be like a guy winning the MVP in the NBA and Adam Silver not being there, right? Like it would, like, the NBA not really having a leadership presence at something like that. So,
and mind you, my thinking with Sifford was that, Sifford is largely known as the Jackie Robinson of golf.
Right.
That he's gone through his life being compared to Jack. He broke the color barrier as the first Black man to play on the PGA Tour.
Right.
So
it's easy.
So it's like, okay, so look at what the baseball does for Jackie Robinson.
Right.
Like you said, like imagine something, they still hold Rachel Robinson in high regard, who's Jackie Robinson's wife. They retired his number. I mean, Jackie Robinson Day, all that. So in comparison, you have this guy who's still living, who's the Jackie Robinson of the sport. And to quote Cornel West, it's the indifference,
Right.
and sometimes indifference to evil is is worse than evil itself.
Evil itself, right.
So it's not that some people weren't even necessarily resistant; they just didn't care. It was just they were just indifferent. So when you're looking for them, here I am thinking, this is my first year working at the organization, and I'm thinking, this is amazing. Like, I'm killing it. Like, this is amazing.
Right.
I'm going to the White House with Charlie Sifford, with Barack Obama. I got all of these people that supported me. There was a process that I had to go through to get all of those letters written to President Obama for Sifford. It started with Alonzo Mourning, who was a friend of mine. I knew he played golf with Obama. Right. I asked Zoe, I said, before I even embark on this, next time you play with Obama, can you ask him if Sifford would be a good candidate for the Presidential Medal of Freedom? Zoe didn't even know who Sifford was at the time. But being the friend that he is, the third time that he played with Obama, I was so upset with him because he played with him twice. I was like, did you ask him? He was like, no, we were talking about some other stuff. So I'm like, dude, so he finally played with him, and Barack told him, yeah, he would be a good candidate. Tell your friend this is what he needs to do. And it was the letter writing campaign. So with the letter writing campaign, I started with Bill Russell. He wrote a letter. I'd known Jim Brown since I was a child because my dad was the first Black running back at Syracuse. So I'd known Jim Brown. So I said, if I can get these guys, start the letters off with these two guys in basketball and football.
Yeah.
And then I got Rachel Robinson, who's Jackie Robinson's wife. She wrote a letter. And then over a period of several months, I was able to amass about 40 letters from, some of the most prominent people in all of sports and Black culture and even in golf. I mean, Arnold Palmer wrote a letter, Jack Nicklaus wrote a letter, Tiger wrote a letter. I mean,
with all that, the PGA was still in.
With all that, I was sitting in a room. I mean, it was a beautiful experience, but it wasn't. Right. It was nowhere near what it should have been.
Should have been, right.
You know what I mean? Like you said, it got reduced to, Charlie, his family, a few other folks that we invited, but no big. I mean, that room could have been amazing. It could have been a great moment of atonement, recognition, and acknowledgement for what he's done.
Right.
So there was none of that, and that's what I envisioned. I envisioned that, wow, this is going to be this is going to be a super magical moment
Right.
that we can take this and move on, so people will know this isn't the PGA of the past. This is the
Right.
future of the organization, right? So we can separate ourselves from some of the dark past and some of the things that we are kind of stereotypically known for, but they kind of kept with they kind of
Right.
stuck with the script.
Wow.
So
Wendell, I'll ask if you're willing to share it. I know you also tried to get Charlie inducted into the Hall of Fame prior to his passing. If you're willing to talk about that process and the resistance you met there, too, we can cut this out if you're not.
oh yeah, no, this is fine, because one of the things and all of this stuff was in my first year, right? I'd known Charlie Sifford because I'd honored him at my own tournament at the original T event in 2007, I believe it was. So I had a relationship with him. You remember in 2014, Charlie Sifford at that time was like 92 years old. So he
Right.
was, he was old and kind of fragile and not in the best of health. But I also knew his family, and I reached out to his lawyer to let him know, like, I wanted to embark on this mission to get him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But I also wanted to make sure that they didn't tell Charlie, because it would have been a huge disappointment at that age to say, "Hey, I tried to do it, man, but they said no." You know what I mean?
Right.
So
Right. Right.
So he didn't even know any of this was going on. But when I started at the PGA, one of the things that I had the mission of was getting right with Charlie Sifford. That for me, it was just a personal mission of mine.
Right.
So I also proposed that he be inducted into the PGA of America Hall of Fame. He was a PGA of America member. Here he is, potentially about to get the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and he's not even in his own Hall of Fame,
Sports Hall of Fame,
as
right.
as a groundbreaker. So I said, I asked my leadership, can he also be expedited into the PGA of America Hall of Fame while we're doing this? I talked to our historian. There's a process that you have to go through to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. So I wrote all of the letters. I petitioned why and what needed to happen. And essentially, it's something that has to go before the board. Their annual meeting, they review it, and then they consider it, and they get back to you and tell you if it's approved or not. So unfortunately, we were in a meeting. It was announced that he was getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And then leadership told me in a conference room, there were other people around me, that they decided not to expedite him into the PGA of America Hall of Fame because they didn't want to get into the practice of expediting people into the PGA of America Hall of Fame, because there are other people who would like to be in the PGA of America Hall of Fame. That if we did this, then we'd have to consider some of the other families and people who want their loved ones in the PGA of America Hall of Fame, and he'll have to essentially just wait until the next induction. So he was inducted into the PGA of America Hall of Fame at the following year's induction, but he died. So he never got to see his own moment of being inducted to the PGA of America Hall of Fame. And when he did, his son was there and his family. And I mean, what a missed opportunity, and certainly, in my opinion, was not the right decision at the time. I mean, you got a guy who's getting the highest civilian honor in the United States of America, who represents what he represents, and you don't find it necessary to expedite him at 92 years old. So, But I said, these are the decisions that you all made. This is not, I mean, I work for you guys, I work for the organization, and I'm trying to be progressive and help make these decisions. But ultimately, these things will reveal the character of the organization. That's kind of what happened.
I kind of look at this stuff kind of cynically, but I'm always thinking, like, the people who made that decision, just remember, when people look back, your grandkids are going to be like, damn, I can't talk about grandma because she was on the board that voted against this guy. Like, I think about those things quite cynically, because I just think that people are resistant. Like, people are resistant to change, and they're resistant to, I mean, even something as symbolic as a Hall of Fame gesture, simply because he broke the color barrier, I think is actually not a smart decision, just from a business standpoint, because I think for baseball, the idea to honor Jackie Robinson and to recognize the contribution that he made, along with some Negro League players, has actually keeps young Black kids. It gives a route for young Black kids to travel into the sport. But when you don't have these sort of stories that connect kids into the sport, so they missed an opportunity, at least while he's alive, for him to understand it, for him to feel that acknowledgement. But
Right.
imagine the kind of, if his family knows what went on. So imagine the kind of sort of attitude that they possess, right? Imagine the black people that have contributed to the sport and other sports that have been overlooked. I think these leagues, again, just do themselves a disservice by not recognizing the moment. Like, it's like they're not, and I mean, there's no way they could do that now in this environment. The PGA they would get,
well, that's probably also why they don't want me to talk about this moment.
Right. They're trying to skate under the radar.
They don't want this moment to be talked about either.
Right.
So,
right.
unfortunately, it's history. It's, you have to own it. This is definitely the moment where you have to own some of the decisions that you've made in the past that have been not in favor of treating black folks, people of color, equitably, or giving them their deserved acknowledgments or compensation or whatever have you. And now a bunch of people are coming out. I mean, you read the paper now, every day somebody's coming out against a company about unfair. It's like a set off a firestorm. So I don't know. I guess they're all legit to a certain extent, but I just hope it doesn't diminish some other people's issues, because they're going to run the gamut from ridiculous to purely legit.
In terms of sort of owning your past, I think that's where a lot of people are missing the boat so badly. Like, going back to the sincerity of Coach K's video, I looked it up. He just finished his 40th season as the head coach of Duke. So to talk about the economic oppression, to talk about the denial of healthcare, to talk about social injustices and systemic racism, like, those are the very pillars that college sports have been built on in this country. And to be such a prominent face, whether he wants to be or not, when you think NCAA and you think basketball, you think Coach K. He's just one of the first people that come to mind. So to talk around those things and have no admission of, like, even just like, I got it wrong. There was none of that in there. So that's where, again, I question the sincerity of a lot of the statements around this, because you have to be willing to own your past and own what you've done.
Right. And that's a big part of moving forward, like actually taking a step in the right direction is acknowledgement, right? Acknowledging that you had an advantage, or that you've taken advantage, or you've been a part of a system that you benefited from, a system that takes advantage. And I think that's hard. I think it's hard for the country, but I think it's really hard in these spaces that we have to navigate. So, like, Wendell, you were talking about, you're a black executive inside the PGA, but then there's no sort of other person that you can go to and be like, hey man, you agree with me on this one, right? Or you understand my perspective. So even when you talk about, like, structurally changing these environments, you can't just hire just one black guy and then he's got to look to, like, it's so deep. Again, it's so structurally based. I think that, again, people have got to at least start to acknowledge, where we are, and understand that it's going to be rough. I'm watching these videos of these crazy ladies and these guys lose their jobs, over trying to police black people on the street. Guys, I saw something the other day, ladies literally picking up her recycling bin, and this lady says, "This is my recycling bin." Lady says, "No, it's not. This is my name. This is my." And so you don't even realize, right, what you're doing, the ramifications now, right, of you trying to police people you have no business policing, you sort of feeling this entitlement, this sense of control over people in your immediate space, and it's costing people their jobs, it's costing people their livelihoods. And I'm like, is it worth it? Like, is it literally worth it? Like, you lost your job, your rep, people, your families being dragged through the mud, all because you're resistant to sort of what the future is going to look like. This country is going to be more diverse. It's going to be more inclusive. And the longer people try to hold on to the very structures that keep us stagnated, the harder it's going to be, right, to get through this moment and get, continue to build from these moments. Again, man, I feel for you in retrospect, just in terms of that environment. And I bet you probably felt like when you went there, like, and I saw the way you were talking about Steph. So particularly if all of that happened in your first year, it's like, damn, I'm getting ready to kill this, man. All I need is these folks to just understand what needs to happen, right? I got Steph, I got the biggest rising star in the game. I got, Barack, the first black president. Like, what are y'all doing?
I got one of the biggest guys in Black Wall Street to
Right.
sponsor my collegiate tournament.
Right.
Steph wasn't until like probably my third year.
Right.
But still, I mean, over that period of time, I'm like, I dressed something,
Right.
It's one of the biggest issues in all of black golf with Sifford. Did an amazing commercial with Chris Paul, his brother, his dad. I mean, a family unit playing golf with their white pro. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I was like, they didn't want to play that commercial. I'm like, what's wrong with this commercial?
Right.
It's just too different from the other ones. Like, well, I thought you wanted different, and I thought you wanted fun and things that would bring more youth into the game and have them be engaged. Like, this is what that is. I thought,
Right.
And then and then the final thing with Steph, man, is like I'm thinking I should be batting 1,000,
Right.
and they're trying to sit me on the bench. You know what I mean?
Right.
The last thing I'll say on it, recently, and Wendell and I have the Richmond connection. I know in Virginia, during the time that Governor Northam ordered that the Robert E. Lee statue would be taken down, and some of the others would be that were state controlled. The VCU statue came down while I was there, and the way in which people around me attempted to justify the statues were just incredible. Like,
right.
Like, and it's crazy because I sit there and think, having been born in Richmond, lived there for a little while, grew up an hour away. It's now Arthur Ashe Monument Avenue, used to just be Monument Avenue. Like, I can only count on a handful of times the number of times I've even seen the statues. Like, and it's going to impact your life so much that you have to come up with a justification for why it existed in the first place and why it shouldn't be taken down.
Right.
It's just this alternate reality that I can't get my head around.
Right.
Well, listen, man, you got a president who's saying, like, this is ours. Like, you're trying to take away our history. Like, okay, what is this not all of America's history? Like, there's a separation that, the stuff that happened to black people, that's black history. And then this stuff is our history. And there's, it's actually all ours. Like, slavery is part of white history and American history too. And certainly with all of these people that fought in wars, there were black people fighting in these wars and things as well, right? That experienced unthinkable things. But then that's also what made, Drew Brees' statement so disappointing. It's like, dude, okay, your grandfather fought in a war that, like, we have grandfathers who fought in those same wars.
Right.
You know what I mean? Who died and fought in those same wars and then came home and couldn't buy a house, couldn't get served in a restaurant. So this interpretation that only your ancestors fought in these wars and need to be heralded, and black people are bugging out because we don't see things the same way. Well, we didn't, we didn't get the same, we didn't have the same entitlements. And that's what privilege is, right? That's what the whole privilege is all about. We do the same things, fight, die, go overseas, do all, and then come back to America and not even get treated equally as American citizens, right? And not only not get treated as American citizens, working against us so that we don't have shit. Like, you can't have nothing. So, just disappointing, man, the way that it's interpreted. And then we're still fighting for basic understanding of what our human rights and our civil rights were, and still are.
And I've said this before, man, and this would be the last thing I say, is that, I think the one area that, you can be hopeful. I just think that if you see this, if you see these young people, man, they're just not with it. They're just not with holding on to the past. They're just not buying the grandmama's story. They're not buying granddaddy's story. They're just not buying it. They're not buying mom and dad's racism. I tell people all the time, like, social media has been a gift and a curse for people, because the curse has been that people I think young people sometimes get confused with social media success and then you have like actual real success, like getting a job, being able to pay bills, and create a life for yourself, a life for your family. But then the other part, and I thought about this a few weeks ago, was that for that white kid that's living somewhere, and he might be surrounded by, there was a video of a young girl, and she was basically sitting there on Instagram Live, videoing herself, but she was recording her parents, and her parents were just on some, A-class bigotry shit. I mean, they were just, you don't understand black people because you haven't been around long enough. And when she started responding, you could tell that she was just generations beyond her parents, because she's sitting at home, right? And she's hearing her dad say, well, black people are this and black people are that. She gets on her social media. She gets on Twitter. She gets on Facebook. She gets on Instagram. And she gets a completely different story. She gets a completely different reality from the black people that she's seeing, with the black kids that she's going to school with, the interactions that she's having. And she's like, wait a minute, something's not measuring up. And then with the peer pressure and the pressure of your surroundings, I think a lot of these kids are just not they're just projected. They don't believe it. They don't think there's any future in it. And I think that's why you see at these rallies and stuff, it's white kids pulling these statues down. You know what I mean? It's like I had a buddy of mine locally here say to me, he said, man, look, I don't want to be seen as a fucked up white person. Like he just doesn't want to, this guy works, closely with kids. He works in child justice and juvenile reform. Like, he's an ally. And he's like, yo, man, I don't want to be seen as one of them.
Yeah. Well, more so at any time. I mean, it's going to take white allies to make this thing change. Right. You know what I mean? I mean, we're still outnumbered in terms of population, right? Unless we're talking about complete segregation, which I don't think is going to happen, or we want to move towards that direction. Right. One of the great things about these protests that it does seem to be more multicultural and more. Most protests and things are historically powered by the youth movement, even civil rights era and all the other, it's generally young people, right? But what we're seeing this time around, more so than ever before, is that, you're right. Like, there are a lot of white folks out there. I mean, protesting this time around, it isn't necessarily black. It's not black against white. It's kind of like everybody against racism right now. You know what I mean? It's like, if you're against racism, then you're part of this movement.
Yeah, pick a side, right? This is the first time in my life I've heard that. Like, pick a side. Pick a side.
It's everybody against racism right now. So, that's what we're fighting against right now, is racism. If you can see the systemic injustice and things that are happening to black people, it's time to speak up, not be indifferent or sit by the sideline. It's time to be vocal. Let us know where you stand. And so we'll know.
Go from there. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So we'll know.
Right.
To hit your point home, David, about introduction to outside influences at a much earlier age, because now I'm sitting here thinking about it. So I went to private school from the age of 5 to 14 until I got to high school. I don't think I had a black classmate until my freshman year of high school.
Right.
Now, granted, I played sports, so in areas where the racial demographics were pretty much 50-50 in all the counties that I played in. So in terms of athletics, I had a whole different experience, which, that's where my life was, really. Right. So that's probably why I turned out the way I turned out instead of a crazy racist person. But that said, again, coming from a small rural area of Virginia, where for real, I don't think I had a black classmate until I was 14.
Right.
But these kids from the age of however soon they can pick up their phone and have access to it, they're seeing the world. They're seeing everything. So it's a whole different perspective for them, that they aren't limited to just whatever it is the parents, the grandparents, the crazy uncles, are saying to them.
And and the kids are using Google. So when your racist uncle says some wild shit, well, black people come from da 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 da. Uncle, you're wrong. Google says that, that's the one, I think, glimmer of hope that I see, right? Is just that, these new medians that these young people are using, it just gives them a different cultural experience. And, a lot of these old folks, these politicians and people who've considered themselves thought leaders, are just realizing that their brand of of society is outdated, right? And it's not, they haven't been able to pass it on to the next era of young kids who are just, their idea is to be more inclusive, to have a more diverse society, because they recognize that's where the nation is and where the nation is headed.
Well, on that note, I think this was a longer but great conversation.
Yeah,
So, Wendell, thanks as always for joining us. And
guys, man, I appreciate it, man. It was great talking to you guys. Freestyling with you guys, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on as a guest.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Forward Thinking, featuring Wendell Haskins. Forward Thinking is co-hosted by David West and Ricky Vellante, produced by Rafa Hernandez Brito, Wendell Haskins, and Ricky Vellante. If you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe Forward Thinking on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube. You can also get more information at thepcleague.com/forwardthinking. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to seeing you next week.